This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
Well, I'd say we've reached a milestone here on the Five Starr Wrestling Report. As of today, we can confidently say that we've survived an entire year of professional wrestling discussion. A task that I did not think was possible, at least when it comes to talking about current day wrestling. But we've made it. It's been a fun ride. And now we just turn our attention over to whatever is in store for 2023. Probably more of the same, as has been the case in modern wrestling for basically 22 or 23 years now. Since the Crash TV era of wrestling, I still don't think the business has ever really fully recovered. But we're going to hold out hope, because even a blind squirrel finds a nut a time or two. And there's been plenty of good moments in 2022, despite a lot of the dreck. So we'll hold out hope that the same runs true for next year. Until then, if you are checking out the Five Starr Wrestling Report for the first time, make sure to subscribe, like the show, comment, and get ready for our final episode of 2022. You can also check us out on Rumble if you so choose. We run shows every Monday and Friday, classic and modern content. And we will be keeping the same format through next year, at least in the interim. I've bounced back and forth with the idea of trying to add or take away content. I think for now, given my schedule, we're just going to stick with what we've got. That way we're not completely running the show on classic content, which, as fun as it is going back and watching some of those shows, we still need a balance. Right now, the Monday show works good because it's mostly a WWE, WWF show. Discount some of the pay-per-view reports. In the Friday show, we got the Dynamite and the NWA World Class reviews. So there's a decent balance. I still won't rule out the possibility of us switching things up at some point. I mean, Lord knows I did that plenty in 2022, especially when it came to the power reports. Looking back, that might be the most mind-boggling thing in wrestling in the last year. The fact that I actually stuck the course for as long as I did with those NWA power reviews. Against my better judgment, because every single time I would get done watching those shows, I'd be like, why am I doing this? But whatever. It's in the past. We're ready to move on from it. And we will press forward with what we've got at the moment. And that should suit the podcast for now. Of course, I can always take recommendations if anybody would care to chime in and share what you would like to hear. If you want a classic review added to the show, we can certainly make accommodations, but I need to see if it'd be worth my while to do so. I know what I would like to talk about ideally, but, get a second opinion that would be helpful. Anyway, we're not making this another 2-hour podcast, or 2.5 hours, I think was what the Monday show ran at. So let's get going with everything before it drags out to that point. Much like AEW Dynamite dragged out this past Wednesday night. So let's see how quickly I can knock this report out. Feels like they get shorter and shorter by the week the more I do this. I think my end goal by the end of 2023 is to give you the 5-minute Dynamite breakdown. No more, no less. And since AEW's decided to void the show of all its real star power in the last several months, basically leaving us with MJF to carry the load, it helps in making the shows easier to recap. less material for me to digest. So anyway, they began the show with the Bryan Danielson-Ethan Page match that they set up last week in that god-awful WWE light comedy sketch where the heels kept calling Danielson Vegetable Man, making bad jokes left and right. So before the opening bell here, they had MJF interrupt from the skybox area to do a heat promo, and he was with, as I wrote down here, a random chick. Allegedly the hottest girl in all of the world, according to MJF. And if MJF's thing is fishy, white, ugly chicks with neck tattoos, nose piercings, and way too much eye makeup, more power to him. But we may need to have a talk if he's looking to go any further than a pump and dump situation. I wouldn't wife that up. And by the way, who was this girl? I have no idea. Apparently we were just supposed to know and or care, which I didn't. In fact, looking back, pretty much everything they did with MJF and this girl in the skybox, I didn't like. Not only because it hurt my eyes looking at her, but the way they structured that whole thing came off so hokey. Like the random point later on where she had her hand on MJF's cheek just admiring him, but she was completely facing him and doing this totally scripted smile while Max was sitting there sipping champagne. Just, I don't know. It all just screams WWE to me. Every time I see them do this artificially contrived bullshit like this, it all just comes off like watered down WWE television. Looking past that though, it was a fine solid little TV match. The Stokely Hathaway interference throughout the match was a little excessive and phony for my liking. I think my newest pet peeve in wrestling, and this always seemed to plague the modern era of wrestling in like the last 15 years, random points where the manager or the outside partner will hit the ring apron to yell or berate the babyface. And not only does the babyface completely stop what he's doing to stand there and look at him like a complete fucking idiot, but the referee also stands there and makes hand motions for the dude to get off the apron. Now, of course, it's done so the heel can cut the guy off to gain the advantage, but it's so contrived with the way they do this shit anymore. It all comes off so lame and bush league. In fact, pretty much anything Stokely was involved with in this segment just dragged it all down. When they were in there wrestling and Stokely was out on the floor making faces and being a goofy comedy act, it was fine. Distracting at points, but not offensive. But as soon as he started getting physically involved, it just detracted from everything the guys were doing. I already talked about the apron spot, which put everything to a halt, but they did a spot toward the end where Danielson was trying to set up for a running knee off the apron to the floor. And I think the idea was that Stokely was supposed to shove Page out of the way so Danielson would crash and burn on the ground. And with the way they did this, they basically had it set up so that Danielson would come down and land awkwardly on his knee. Had it gone horribly wrong, guaranteed he would have either twisted or sprained something on the landing. And just like that, there goes AEW's only program worth giving a fuck about on this godforsaken show. The last thing these idiots need to be dealing with right now is losing Danielson to another injury, especially after all the time he's been off earlier this year. So I hated that spot. And it was a total throwaway spot that led to absolutely nothing, because then they just got in the ring and kept doing more shit. And finally at the end, after what I deemed a way too competitive TV match, if Danielson is supposed to be the next top babyface challenger to the world title, Danielson fought out of the ego's edge, hit Page with the running knee, and then he won with an unnamed crossface submission. Still a decent TV match. I don't think I'd say anything they did was visually insulting outside the Stokely angles that I already touched on. But again, I'll just expand on what I said a second ago. If Danielson is supposed to be their number one babyface at the moment challenging for the world title, can you explain to me why in any rational sense it would be taking him well over 15 minutes to beat a mid-card geek like Ethan Page? And I'm not even trying to disown Page when I say that, because I happen to like Ethan Page, but since he's shown up in AEW, what is his biggest claim to fame? He's a dude that Tony Khan has pushed on and off for the last 2 years. He never wins anything when it counts. And aside from the couple of times where he's gone to shine on the microphone, most of the time he's been a background player in randomly paired factions. So in the world of AEW, Ethan Page is a nobody. He's just a guy. So I don't think Danielson should have been as competitive with him, but that's just me. Booking novice over here that's never spent one day in the business. Just trying to provide some constructive criticism after having watched this godforsaken product for well over 20 years now. And I probably spent way too long covering a match that probably earned about a 2-minute recap anyway. So I'll try to pick things up with the next segment I watched. They advertised Wardlow versus Samoa Joe for the TNT title tonight. So obviously in the land of AEW, that means they have to shoot an angle in the back beforehand with Joe jumping Wardlow with a lead pipe during an interview. Because of course it's got to be in the middle of an interview. I mean, when else do people get jumped or interrupted on this show? And this lead pipe shot was so devastating that the camera made sure to blatantly film Joe completely missing Wardlow's leg and hitting the concrete. Wherein somebody off camera shouted, "We need medical attention." Because once again, the WWE light syndrome rubs off on AEW in more ways than one can imagine. So that segment sucked. As did Renee Paquette stealing from the playbook of Tony Schiavone and managing to magically teleport from one interview segment to the next in about 60 seconds. Completely unfazed by what just happened a minute ago with Wardlow and Joe, now she's in the back somewhere with Adam Page in the job order, totally calm. And I have no idea what they talked about because of the parties involved. The job order is an instant channel changer for me. And to be honest, Adam Page might soon be making that list too, considering all the crap he's been involved with this year. He had that one good match of the year candidate with Danielson at the start of the year, and it was one slippery downhill slide from there. So I fast forwarded to the beginning of the next segment. While Jon Moxley doesn't exactly bring hopeful bliss to this show whenever I see him on screen, I did catch that he was teaming with Claudio, so I wanted to see who they were facing and see if it was even worth my time talking about it. They wrestled Top Flight. Once again, another one of my biggest gripes with modern wrestling today. Random babyface matches on free TV for no reason. No one to directly cheer for, splitting the crowd 50-50, nobody gets over, and it does nothing for anybody involved. And I like Claudio, but this was a lose-lose situation across the board as far as I was concerned. So I decided to take a hard pass on that one too. Predictably, Mox and Claudio win. So after all those months of Tony's stop-and-start pushing of Dante Martin down our fucking throats, I think the bloom's kind of off the rose with him at this point. Had the potential to do something with him when the people cared. Like he does so often, he beats him like a drum to the point where now I don't care. I see him on TV and I say, wasted potential. Seriously, remember all that shit they did where they kept flipping in between random tag partners on this show? Going back and forth between face and heel in a matter of weeks. The whole Team Taz garbage and never led anywhere. The Leo Rush pairing that existed for a cup of coffee before Leo pieced out and left Dante to piss in the wind. I'm old enough to remember. Feels like ancient history at this point. So at that point, I went ahead to the Hook match. Another guy that apparently Tony Khan decided to jump back on the bandwagon. Would have been nice to see that during the entirety of 2022 and not for about 6 weeks before the guy completely vanished from television. But he's back for now. Keywords for now. Until Tony gets bored of him again. And he beat another job guy in relatively short order with the Red Rum. Nothing wrong with it. other than the fact that this is what Tony should have been doing consistently with the guy for like 8 or 9 months. Slowly and steadily building him up the card and getting him ready for higher profile matches headed into next year. Instead, Tony Khan logic, he starts to gain traction on TV. So, Tony pulls him from the A show, books him sporadically on the Rampage and YouTube shows that nobody watches, completely kills his steam, and now we're basically back to square one with him winning short squash matches on television. Genius level booking there. And for the record, when I say booking him in higher profile matches, I do not mean the firm. Specifically Big Cass and or Lee Moriarty. Because, no offense, who gives a fuck about Big Cass and or Lee Moriarty on this show? Certainly not me. And I guess in order for Tony to ensure that he really seals the deal with Burying Hook, now he's going to saddle him with Jungle Boy as a tag partner. The human vacuum of black hole charisma. Beautiful. So at that point, we had the Carnies and Acrobats out for their little stunt show. Match 6 or whatever part we're at in this never-ending saga of hopeless, futile 6-man tag matches with the school children. Elite Death Triangle. Falls count anywhere, no DQ, all hands on deck, fuck off, beat off session. And that's what I did right then and there. I fucked right off with having to put myself through any of that garbage. Same goes with the girls segment. Now, I did not beat off by skipping over it, but I definitely avoided it at all costs. And I know for a fact that I am not in the minority, judging how most AEW viewers treat the girl segments on these shows anyway. By the way, last week's show, main eventing with Sheeta and Hayter, whatever that match was, didn't reflect all that well in the overall numbers. Just saying. So that basically left me with about 20 minutes of programming left, give or take. I watched a great Ricky Starks promo in the back, where he talked up his match with Jericho next week, wherein I jokingly but begrudgingly at the same time wrote down, this is more like a Ricky Starks eulogy rather than a promo. Because I think we all know where this goes in 7 days. Rest in peace, Ricky Starks. We barely knew thee. It was great delivery, though. Said that Jericho spoke a lot of truths about Starks last week, mostly that he's a star in the making, which we all knew about. But the problem for Jericho is that he cannot stand the fact that Ricky Starks is somebody that stands out on his own and makes his own decisions. So that he's the man with the big mouth and the bad attitude. And next week, he promises to put on a master class of whipping Jericho's ass. Notice how he did not say that he's going to beat him, though. I wish I could stay optimistic. But when it comes to anything involving Jericho at this point, I've just come to expect the worst. 2 years of non-stop Jericho. 2 straight years of bad programs after bad programs after bad segments after bad segments after turn the channel heat moment after turn the channel heat moment. I have no hope. We'll see what they do. But if y'all are expecting Ricky Starks to get that clean, defining victory over Chris Jericho on free TV next week, don't give your hopes up. But that brought us to the main event. Originally scheduled to be Wardlow and Joe for the TNT title, but since Wardlow was taken out with the Phantom Pipe Shot, they tried to leave us with a teaser that he was not going to be cleared to compete. So, of course, Joe gets on the mic beforehand, does a great heat promo, trying to get the cheap heat by poking fun at the Denver crowd sports teams, saying that he'd have one of the hometown heroes try and step up to the plate, but Denver's already taken enough seasonal losses. They don't need to be further embarrassed. And while he's talking, out comes Wardlow, selling the kayfabe injury. He was moderately limping on his alleged bad knee, and if we were intended to be sold on the idea that Wardlow's leg was badly hurt, he had a fairly easy time getting down the ramp and getting into the ring to take the fight to Joe. And that's not to take shots at Wardlow for bad selling. He's just green and doesn't have a whole lot of experience with it because, oh wait, stop me if you've heard me say this before. When is the last time that watching Wardlow sell get over? Oh, that's right. It didn't because it's fucking stupid. Having Wardlow sell is the exact opposite of how they should be booking him. He should be no-selling everything, smashing through dudes, and beating them in short order. The one thing that got the motherfucker over from the very beginning. Bell rings, Monster Smash, Powerbomb Symphony, 1, 2, 3. It's the easiest booking formula in the world to follow, and somehow Mr. Booker of the Year can't even get that fucking right. How do you screw up the Goldberg push? Seriously, it is that simple. Bell rings, kills the guy in short order, hits him with his finisher, walks out. You can do that all in less than a minute. Eric Bischoff did that in WCW for like 3 straight years. Now, granted, they fucked him up eventually because it's WCW, but they had a hot streak going with the guy. Even WCW got the Goldberg push right for a little bit. Took Tony Khan less than 6 months to screw Wardlow up. So naturally, after Tony books Wardlow in the complete opposite direction by having him sell, work long matches, fight from underneath, and lose the crowd almost instantly. Hence the fans booing or staying quiet for virtually all of Wardlow's offense and chanting, "Joe's gonna kill you." Idiot. They also shoot an angle a few minutes in where Joe hit Wardlow with one of those over-the-shoulder knee breakers, and as Wardlow rolls out to the floor, they bring over the doc to check his knee out, and they bring down some of the medical staff geeks to just kind of kneel on the ground and not really do anything. Also, Wardlow could wind up getting to his feet, gingerly hobble back into the ring, while Paul Turner is administering the 10 count, by the way, even though we've already been through like a solid 2-minute period where Wardlow was just on the floor and the ref was not counting beforehand. Fans at this point are still chanting for Joe, the heel, which is just a solid thumbs up. And I believe it was at the point where Wardlow was managing to successfully hit sentons and running corkscrew dives off the turnbuckles when he's supposed to be selling the bad knee. That was about the point where I just got fed up and skipped to the finish because I about had enough. Obviously, whoever's teaching or working with Wardlow in this company is doing a fucking horrid job actually trying to get the guy to learn how to properly work. The guy needs a real training camp with experienced professionals that are going to steer him in the right direction. Obviously, we've established at this point that is not going to happen so long as he's stuck in this cesspool of dreck that is AEW. So, I have no hope for the guy at this point. So Wardlow tried for the powerbomb, but the leg gave out. So Joe took advantage, locked in the coquina clutch, and retained. And because they can never just leave well enough alone in this company, they also had to shoot an afterbirth where Joe broke out a pair of scissors and cut off Wardlow's ponytail. Which I won't complain about because I've been under the impression that Wardlow's needed a haircut for a long time now. So we'll see if the new look suits him. Maybe they'll decide to shave his head or give him a crew cut look. It'll look better than the man bun. But that led to Darby Allin running down about a year too late for the ineffective save after the damage had already been done. So just to set the record straight, in the land of AEW, whenever a run-in would actually be warranted to make the save for a guy, they do it about an hour late. But They'll have plenty of geeks on standby for pull-aparts or running angles whenever they try to shoot the thing 5 seconds after it starts. Good Lord. And it sucks too. I just got done doing my year-end wrestling analysis on the Monday special, and I know for a fact that both Joe and Wardlow came up in that conversation of both guys that Tony's completely missed the boat on in the last year. With Joe, I think it's still a matter of damage control, because at least we can say that Joe is on television consistently now and feels like a somewhat bigger deal than he did even as far back as 3 or 4 months ago. Wardlow, on the other hand, I don't even know what to make of that whole debacle. You want to talk about guys that will forever go down historically as absolute botched opportunities. Jesus H. Christ. It's the Ryback principle all over again. A guy that had so much traction and so much backing support when he first came in, and it all got squandered. I don't know how you recover from this. I think in the case of Wardlow at this stage, their best case scenario would be to get him off of television and have him come back fresh in about 6 months after we've all gotten the chance to forget about the way they buried him in the last 4 or 5. Because at this point, I don't know how keeping him on television is all that productive. Aside from the fact that they just beat him flat here, the fans were actively booing him for the majority of the match. It wasn't even fair to say that was a 60-40 split in favor of Joe. That was like an 80-20, maybe 90-10. That's not fucking good. And again, I like both these guys. In an ideal company run by competent people and the booking wasn't complete horseshit, the Joe Wardlow thing would have been a fine program. But again, it's the problem of Tony Khan having no idea what he's doing, and he has absolutely no clue or concept of how to follow up on anybody when they get hot. We saw it with Hook. We saw it with Powerhouse Hobbs. I'm sure we'll see it eventually with Ricky Starks once Jericho gets finished with him. We saw it with FTR. They're probably the biggest offense in that whole thing. And again, man, I'm really trying to stay optimistic about it going into 2023, but after watching this show, what is there to really look forward to at the moment? Starks getting buried by Jericho? More the same with AEW's lowest of the totem pole guys getting the bulk of the screen time again? And what about MJF? The Danielson program is their best option right now, but what about afterwards? If they keep Starks above water by having him go over Jericho, there's potential for them to revisit that program when the people would still give a fuck, but who else? Jon Moxley again? No thanks. Claudio could work as a fill-in program, but I don't expect that to be something they try and drag out for 2 or 3 months. And again, that's why I'm kind of pulling for them to just go ahead now, pull Wardlow from the show, send him away for a while so we can all get a palate cleanser, and then bring him back maybe sometime in like mid-2023 when he's fresher, and you could probably revisit the program with him and MJF for the belt. It may not work well in Wardlow's favor if MJF is still getting pretty massive split reactions from city to city, but it is always a possibility. But I'm just looking at the talent pool right now, and I don't see a lot of options. For a roster of 300-some dudes, you'd think I'd be able to come up with at least 10, but I really can't. You got Starks, you got Danielson. Against my better judgment, you got Moxley, maybe Claudio, possibly Wardlow if they haven't totally neutered him by the time they decide to re-enter that program. FTR, I'm just going to go out on a limb and figure they've about tapped out at this point. I don't think Miro's coming back anytime soon. Powerhouse Hobbs is still a heel, so that wouldn't work. Kyle O'Reilly's injured. Adam Cole's still out. Hook is sort of a dark horse if you wanted to throw his name into the hat too, but he's got a long ways to go now that they're basically starting from scratch with his booking all over again. And again, we're just talking about potential world title programs right now. Where does that leave everything else on the card? That's the real question I think that needs to be had. I mean, God help us if they try to throw Kenny Omega into that world title equation again. If they actually book an Omega MJF title program in 2023, I don't even want to think about it because I'll start gagging. So why don't we move on before I do so? All right. Last Saturday Night Superstation show to review for 1986. Let's go. It's been a hell of a ride for the last 12 months. Lots of stuff has happened. Lots of big, impactful moments for the NWA. In some instances, some rather tragic moments. But boy, was it fun going back and getting a chance to relive a lot of those shows. Some of them for the first time ever. And now we get to do it again for 1987. So we kick things off here with a ring entrance for the main event babyfaces. It appeared to be a Sunday night taping for NWA Pro, although I don't think they ever specified that at all during the program. But it was an 8-man tag, pinning all members of the Horsemen up against the team of the Road Warriors, Dusty Rhodes, and Nikita Koloff. We got just a glimpse of that with the babyface team making their way out through the crowd. And according to David Crockett here, this clip was allegedly the biggest moment in wrestling history. Yes, a group of babyfaces walking to the ring is, according to David Crockett, the greatest / most monumental moment in the entirety of professional wrestling's existence. At least up until that point. I could probably think of a couple bigger moments, but we will take David's word for it for the time being. Anyhow, they did their usual hype and rundown, talking about the upcoming United States Tag Title Showdown between Ronnie Garvin, Barry Windham, and the Midnights for later on. And that brought out Dusty and Nikita for a promo. And aside from the hideous choppy audio that was going on here while Dusty was talking, here's basically what I wrote down about this promo. Nikita was going to get funky like a monkey with Ric Flair in Indianapolis for the world title. Dusty and the Road Warriors are going to kick some booty. I presume that they meant they were defending the 6-man tag team championship. And show of hands for anybody that forgot that little detail. And only Dusty Rhodes has enough charm to where he can take note of a fat chick in the crowd going crazy for Nikita, and the crowd still pops for it. Then Nikita basically laid out the challenge to any of the Horsemen that want to step up and wrestle him for the U.S. heavyweight title. He also bumbled his way through some verbiage about wrestling Ric Flair in the Twin Cities, which he needed help from Dusty for reference. I presume he meant Minneapolis. And then he said that it is time for a new breed of talent to take over as the leader of the promotion. Though we went to the ring for Dick Murdoch versus Brody Chase. Haven't seen Captain Redneck on the show in quite a while. I wonder what he's been up to. Can't remember if Murdoch was working in any other promotions or territories around this point. Like, I know he was in Japan for a brief period, but wasn't that a little later on in his career? I might have to look that up later. Anyway, they had a relatively short match. At best, I could say it was boring. There was a moment at the end where I thought Murdoch wasn't actually going to get Brody overhead for a back body drop because it was a rough landing for Brody on the landing. But Murdoch ended up going over after dropping a straight elbow across the chest. After which we cut to the booth for a Ronnie Garvin, Jim Crockett Jr. promo. And this was actually a little interesting segment because I never knew this was a rule that the National Wrestling Alliance held back in the 80s. I guess it was just one of those under-the-radar regulations that everyone secretly kind of knew about, but it wasn't really talked about that often. Or maybe they just brought it up here and never referenced it again. But Jim Crockett informed Ronnie that because he is currently one half of the United States Tag Team Champions as well as the Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Champion, he's going to have to make a decision as to which belt he wanted to keep, because he is not permitted to hold two major world titles at a given time. And Ronnie basically says that while being Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Champion meant a lot to him, he also has an obligation to his partner Barry Windham as one half of the U.S. Tag Champions. So he voluntarily gives up the Mid-Atlantic belt as to not disappoint his partner. And boy, howdy, you want to talk about the ultimate heat swerve that they totally missed the boat on in '87. Could you imagine if Russo had the book back then? What he would have done with that angle had Ronnie given up the Mid-Atlantic title to hold on to one half of his U.S. tag titles? Guarantee you, in the following match, he would have had Barry turn heel on Ronnie and leave him for dead. Just to be a dick. Now, of course, it wouldn't have made any sense to do that, but bro, it's a swerve, bro. No one would have ever seen it coming, bro. Now, this is still when professional wrestling at least had a shred of credibility to its name, so they weren't going to do that. So coming back from break, we had not the U.S. Tag Team Champion, Ivan Koloff, even though his graphic read underneath U.S. Tag Team Champion. Whoops. Anyway, he basically did a heat promo on Nikita, said that his childhood nightmare, Vladimir Petrov, will soon be coming in to teach Nikita a lesson the hard way. The man that gave Nikita his toughest competition at a young age, the one that trained Nikita into the man he became. After Nikita betrayed his morals in his home country, Russian justice will be served. And this Vladimir Petrov is no laughing matter. A man that has bench pressed 650 pounds and half a ton in squats. Impressive. I am about a 16th of the way there at the gym. By the time I manage to bench press or squat anywhere close to 500 pounds, I'll probably be at least 30 years past my expiration date. Unless I start hitting the juice now and work out 7 days straight for the next 25 years, then maybe there's hope. Maybe I could be the next Liver King. But at that point, we went to our featured match for the program, the U.S. Heavyweight Tag Team title match between the Midnight Express and Ronnie Garvin and Barry Windham, wherein the current and defending champions were the ones already in the ring, and it was the Midnights that got the grand entrance. The smart fan in me had some warning bells flashing right there. Now, of course, it wouldn't be a Midnight Express match if we didn't have Jim Cornette on commentary throughout the segment. And boy, when it came to one-liners and jabs, Corny was hitting on all cylinders early, including saying that his Christmas gift for David Crockett this year was the address to the Columbian School of Broadcasting. Now, of course, David just breaks the fourth wall and starts laughing about it. He also made a comment about his mother wishing Tony a Merry Christmas. I'm not even going to touch that one. All joking aside, though, watching this match in full, it really got me thinking to something that I thought a lot about when I was compiling my list of top 20 matches in 2022. And you probably caught on to the theme if you watched the Monday show, which I still encourage you to do so. It was a very long podcast, but I think it's worth your time viewing. But if you did check out the ending portion of the show when we were running down my matches of the year, did you take note of the fact that all of the tag matches we talked about involved FTR? And while we did get that great trio series of matches with them and the Briscoes, you know, even going back to late 86 and watching the Midnights wrestle what was essentially billed at the time a makeshift tag team with Ronnie Garvin and Barry Windham of all people, the fact that Garvin and Windham could just be thrown together as a random pairing and they still managed to outclass almost every modern tag team in the business today, God, does that go to show the sorry state of tag team wrestling in 2022. Almost 2023. What the hell happened? You know, the thing is, if you actually break down the match and go over the logistics of what they did, honestly, it really wasn't all that special of a match. It was very good, which goes without saying when it comes to the four guys involved. But even considering how shortly Ronnie and Barry were teaming by this point, they still worked as a great cohesive unit through the whole thing. Everyone's sweating and working their asses off the whole time. Well, I should more accurately say everybody was sweating except Dennis. I don't think he broke a sweat at all here, and he was still working just as hard as everybody else, but, you know, Dennis was a different animal. But it made perfect sense with the story they laid out. You got the most experienced tag team in the NWA around this point, challenging the two champions, who have really only been an established duo for all of like 6 weeks by this point. And it made absolute sense to lay it out so that the Midnights could take about 90% of the offense. Garvin and Wyndham could sell and sell for virtually the whole thing. And they basically established at the end with a time limit draw that the only reason Garvin and Wyndham retained the titles was because they survived. And they had some great stuff at the end here where the Midnights hit the rocket launcher on Ronnie, and as Eaton's trying to wrestle Garvin's shoulders down to pin him, Garvin keeps popping it off the mat so that Scrappy can't count the three. And the fans are egging on Ronnie to hang in there for just another 30 or so seconds before the bell. Then Dennis hits with a brainbuster on Ronnie right at the tail end. But before the final pinfall attempt, the bell sounds. And they do their great little post-match angle where the Midnights jump Ronnie. Corny gets in there with a few cheap shots to the gut with the handle of the tennis racket. And they leave him hunched over and laid out. This is fucking classic pro wrestling, dude. An easy, simply told story that made total sense. And it furthered along the ongoing Midnight's Ron Garvin feud that only escalates from here. This time it was a tennis racket shot. Give it about a month or so, Ronnie wouldn't be so lucky the next time he encountered these guys. You know, and as I noted a minute ago, was this 1986's match of the year? No. Would I say this was even better than the Rock and Roll Express, Manny Fernandez and Rick Rude World Tag Title match from a few weeks back? I wouldn't say so. Similar format in terms of the way the match was laid out. Mostly a one-sided heel beatdown, but in the case of the Bull Rude match, they still wound up winning the belts at the end. This one, they still kept the belts on the baby faces, but they basically drew the conclusion that the Midnights had their number. They had the match won. Had it not been for the time limit expiration, it's easy to comprehend storytelling. Never has to be that complex. It's easy to forget. Sometimes easy and coherent is the best policy when it comes to booking wrestling. Something I think a lot of modern wrestling should take into consideration today. So this all worked. As did watching the Road Warriors come in and fucking mutilate the Mulkey brothers in about 8 seconds. With one of my new favorite spots of all time, as Animal goes to give one of the Mulkeys a second row power slam, and right as he's going for the pin, we see Hawk in the corner of the frame dropping the other Mulkey brother with a move and doing the simultaneous pin. I don't know what the hell he hit him with, but all you see is a Mulkey jabroni come barreling into the frame like he'd been dropped out of an airplane without a parachute. It's pretty fucking amazing. That was followed with the usual fired-up Legion of Doom promo, wherein Hawk mentioned something about the Road Warriors being made out of steel, iron, and, quote, anything that's hard. I'm surprised he didn't just flat out say, we're always hard. And then Animal shouted a few things that kind of went in one ear and out the other, but it was very loud, so the people were excited. But we did have Dusty and Nikita come out during their promo, so Animal could acknowledge them and make the challenge to any 4 set of men in the locker room that have the balls to try and stand up to them. To which Hawk perfectly caps it off by saying, and if you don't like it, We don't care. I want that on a t-shirt. I can use that line virtually every day in my life, and it'll never get old. So coming back from break, we had the Midnights back out to kind of recap everything that went down earlier. After plugging their upcoming matches with the Road Warriors at the local towns, however many of their scaffold matches they have left. But this was basically all about hyping up the big angle that is forthcoming in basically a month or so now. So Jim Cornette goes over the highlighted footage of the match we saw, comically mentioning that Big Bubba tripped on the floor when he was trying to help Barry Windham back to his feet. Meanwhile, he was out there beating the shit out of him. But the big takeaway here is that Corny inferred that the next time the Midnights get in their ring with Ronnie, they're going to take him out of the picture permanently. Somehow, some way, and he doesn't care what procedure must be done to make it happen. All the while he tells Barry Windham that because he's new around the NWA, they'll heave him a message that he can either take or leave. He can either ditch Ronnie, hand over the U.S. tag belts to the Midnights and walk away while he's still breathing, or he's going to get the same treatment that they're going to eventually hand Ronnie the next time they get in the ring with him. And always remember, folks, years of watching James E. Cornette in the business, whenever he makes a promise, he delivers on his word. So when he says that something bad is going to happen to Garvin in the future, we can best believe it's going to happen. Well, he wasn't lying. So after that little art of ominous foreshadowing, we cut back to the ring for the Raging Bull and Rick Rude versus Pablo Crenshaw and Dave Spencer. Once again with Rick Rude's incredibly hideous canned WWE music. Whatever they dubbed over the original music, it literally sounded like something you would hear if you were casually perusing a porn site. Not that I would know. So this match, how about we talk about this match and get off that topic as quickly as possible. Well, Bull and Rude were matching purple gear for this match. It was a vast improvement over their previously coordinated attire, which didn't look coordinated at all. And they kind of followed the same formula here with working over one of the job guys for pretty much the whole thing, while the other one stood on the apron and twiddled his thumbs for about 5 minutes. Fans spent most of the match heckling the heels. We had chants of Ragin' Cow again, which was just as amusing here as it was the first time I heard it. I also believe at one point I heard the people chanting, "We want Robert." I presume they meant Robert Gibson. And if so, why they left poor Ricky out of the equation, I have no idea. Maybe this female audience was particularly pro-Robert Gibson. By the way, Paul Jones was also out there, being as completely useless a manager as he's been for pretty much the entire Bull-Rude duo. And I also love this new formula for television they've been doing lately, where they'll sometimes have a TV match that they have to cut the break for. So they do that. And then instead of coming back and maybe having like the match go a few more minutes to make the commercial feel worthwhile, they'll come back from break and then they'll just go straight to the finish in like 10 seconds. So they return from break, and within about 45 seconds, Rude just tags in, hits one of the job guys with a Rude Awakening DDT, and gets the pin. To which I then ask, we needed the 90-second commercial break in there. Why exactly? Then we went to the booth with all three guys, where Paul Jones, in about 20 seconds, rapidly fired off about 100 things in one breath. "Rock and Roll Express, you're crying over spilled milk. You better be 100% in Norfolk when Rude and Bull bring it to you for the World Tag Team Championships, and we'll show you who the true champions are. And as for the Road Warriors, you might be big and bad, but when you're laying flat on your back, you'll be just as big and bad as Bull and Rudy." And yes, for the record, he called Rick Rude Rudy. Can't tell if that was accidental or not. Knowing Paul Jones, it probably was unintentional. Those followed with Rick Rude talking about him and Bull being on top of the world, looking down at everybody else in the locker room. He called the Road Warriors a bunch of blowfish. Said they puff their chests out and try to look all mean and bad when they're just a bunch of wussies. And Bull also did another pretty good fiery heel promo. Didn't get a whole lot out of his dialogue, but he did refer to Nikita Koloff as Chiquita, which I thought was kind of funny. Basically just kind of reiterated the previous talking points and said that R&R is the best tag team and they have the belts to prove it. And then coming back from break, we had the other set of tag champions back out. Barry Windham and Ron Garvin. And Garvin was talking about how he doesn't feel too well after the match they just had, but he's well enough to know that from their current vantage point, they do not see too many teams in the NWA that can whip them, but they do see particular jerks on the roster, such as the Midnight Express, to which I wrote down snidely, maybe Ronnie needs to take a little look harder, because when he said that there are not any teams in the NWA that can whip them, apparently he forgot about the match they had less than 20 minutes prior where they got out-wrestled, outclassed, and dominated by the challengers. He also referenced the fact that at Starrcade 86, he beat that big blubber of fat, Bubba Rogers, a match that Ronnie also lost, by the way. But he is refreshing our memory that this whole feud with the Midnights kind of instigated from the Starrcade match between Ronnie and Big Bubba. And we also had Barry Windham here saying that all the Midnights proved tonight was that they can go the distance with the champs, but they still did not walk out with the belts. And all they need to do is set the date, time, and place, and Ronnie and Windham will be ready to put the belts on the line against them anytime. Cutting back to the ring, we had a brief rock and roll squash with Zane Smith and Kent Glover. I wrote down the bare minimum for this match. Beat down on Glover for approximately 90 seconds. Beat him with a double dropkick. Literally nothing else to say. But that was mostly a prelude to the next segment, with then Pro Wrestling Illustrated's senior editor Bill Apter here to recognize the Rock and Roll Express as 1986 Tag Team of the Year. And while I personally never put a lot of stock in any of the end-of-the-year awards from the major news sites or journal outlets, even the more notable ones, got to admit, it's hard to argue against this vote. And I've talked before about how 1986 was one of the best years to go back and watch classic tag team wrestling if you're just looking for an all-around great selection of top teams. Road Warriors, Midnights, Rock and Roll, Minnesota Wrecking Crew. Any of those duos could have been recognized as Tag Team of the Year, and you would have had a legitimate case for all of them. Now, personally, 1986 is one of my favorite years to go back and watch the Rock and Roll Express in their prime. All of their feud rotation, from the fallout with the Russians at the end of 85 to the Midnight stuff they were doing early on, all eventually circling back to their ties with the Anderson brothers and the Horsemen toward the end of the year. They really ran the full gauntlet of the best heel teams around those 12 months, and they were on fire during it all, having some of the best matches they had in their entire career. So I certainly wouldn't argue against Ricky and Robert earning that vote. Nor will I debate Ric Flair being awarded as Wrestler of the Year for the third consecutive year. And boy, we want to talk about the genius of Flair's promo delivery. Only Ric Flair can make an acceptance speech for an award, break the fourth wall out of kayfabe to thank everybody for the prestigious honor, whether they cheered or booed him, and by the end, he still manages to throw it back in everyone's face by saying that they made the smart decision in voting Flair Wrestler of the Year because there's only one man deserving of that honor, and it's the man that stands before them. Nowadays, you'd be having top heels unashamedly breaking character and acting like white meat baby faces. But Flair was right. There was only one of him in wrestling history, and for all his trials and tribulations, for all that we can say about Ric Flair, good, bad, or otherwise, The one thing we can never deny is that there was nobody else like him. None that came before him and none that tried to duplicate him in latter years. I'm looking at you, Buddy Landau. Nah, I'm kidding. No, Jeff Jarrett, on the other hand, he can go fuck right off with his garbage-ass Fargo strut. Now, Flair did have a follow-up promo with Tony Schiavone where he started off basically baby-facing the NWA and putting over everybody that works for Crockett Promotions. And within the span of about 60 seconds, somehow he was able to flip that on its face and start admonishing all the poor people across the country that wish they could live in Ric Flair's shoes for a day. Said that for the people that assert that Flair ought to be wrestling 320-odd-something days a year to earn the prestige of Wrestler of the Year, when you factor in that he makes $4,000 a day, it is money that people wish they could sniff in their entire life. Says the Road Warriors are out here every week trying to figure out what color to paint their faces up. Flair's got over 100 custom suits that he can choose from to come out and be a superstar on television. And if the people want to see him wrestle, they have to dish out the big bucks, daddy. You know, of course, Tony's trying to turn it over by asking when Flair's going to defend his belt on television. To which Flair basically says that anyone that writes into the show and picks guys like Dusty or Nikita, those names are out of the conversation. But if they want to throw some undercard geeks at Flair, then that's fine. Because for free television, you ain't getting the big matches. Got to pay to see those go down. What a smart businessman. If only WCW had that same mentality 10 years later, they probably would have stayed in business a while longer. And there was something else he screamed about here too. Of course, he had to get in his Marriott Hotel plug at the end, just to let everybody know that he'll be fucking some girls after the show's over. But what else is new with Rick? But then, ladies and gentlemen, the real match of the year right here. The match that I wish they'd have made a 60-minute Iron Man match. It is not too often I actually crave to see an extended squash match on the Superstation. But when one of those matches is Tully Blanchard defending his television title against Pat O'Brien, there's always an exception to the rule. Now, beyond the fact that we've made countless jokes about O'Brien in the last few episodes and how fucking rotten he was as a professional wrestler, of all matches for them to decide, we need to take this home quickly, they picked this one. Big missed opportunity there. Instead of it being a 10-minute squash, they gave it about 30 seconds and change. And after Tully won with the slingshot, I just said, damn it. Now, in that time, Pat O'Brien did manage to fuck up a running rope spot where he took a knee to the gut and then flipped over and spiked himself on his head because he obviously had no idea what he was doing. I'm telling you, if there was ever a match where Tully should have just shot on the guy and beat the crap out of him, this would have been it. I hope they have a rematch down the road because I need to see Tully spend another 5 to 10 minutes just taking this clown to school. There's always hope. Following that, we had a rock and roll promo where they plugged their upcoming title match with Rude and Bull in Norfolk. I wrote literally nothing else down about it. Then we cut back to the ring for a Bill Dundee squash with Clement Fields, wherein apparently Superstar Dundee had garnered so much heat with the studio crowd at this period that he was able to get people to start a "We Want Sam" chant. That's a lot of heat. Dundee went over with, as I wrote down, something off the top rope resembling an elbow drop to the back of the head. He more so just leapt off the top rope and came crashing down on Fields. Didn't look pretty. Tony and David mentioned something here briefly about Dundee being in negotiation with the Barbarian about some kind of working agreement or something. A, I have no memory of this, and B, if that happens to be true, I need to see some vignettes of those conversations now, where Bill Dundee is sitting down trying to converse contract deals with fucking Barbarian of all people. That sounds like entertainment. Following that, though, we had Ole and Arn Anderson versus Bill Tabb and Randy Mulkey. Or Randy Barber, not Randy Mulkey. My bad. They do start to blend together after a while, though. Tony pointing out here that Arn Anderson is decked out in all red. Isn't Arn always wearing red? Or am I just that unobservant? Could have sworn that I've seen Arn wrestle in red for like the majority of these TV matches. As per usual, it is the typical Anderson Brothers massacre. All the while, Tony and David are just having a ball calling it. You've never heard another set of men so happy to call someone being bludgeoned to death on broadcast TV. Same goes with the fans chanting for the heels to beat the crap out of these numbskulls. But eventually, Double A hit Barber with the Gourd Buster, making sure to call out Nikita in the process because he's got his sights set on the U.S. heavyweight title. And that was touched on very deceitfully in their follow-up promo. Great little attention to detail here if you kind of know where things are going in story. Because first you had Ole sort of refreshing everybody's memory on what he talked about last week. The whole conspiracy of Jim Crockett doing everything to hold Ole and Arn back from a chance at the tag titles. And it's during this promo where JJ interrupts and basically cuts Ole off cold, saying that he's been in talks with Jim Crockett, and while they do not have the official contract for the U.S. title match signed, they're working on getting a deal together. And meanwhile, there's Ole just kind of standing in the background, left to piss in the wind, while the entire attention is on JJ and Arn. It's a very, very subtle little detail, but very important story material as we approach the early stages of 87. Things are going to be shifting in the Horseman dynamic very soon, and we're going to start to see that breakdown right here. Coming back, though, we had Dick Murdoch out for a quick promo. And apparently I was right when I inferred that Murdoch had been gone touring in Japan for the last month or so, which is why he was absent from NWA TV. I had thought he'd done his New Japan stuff a couple years later, but I guess there was a brief period in 86 where he was touring in Japan and Germany too. But now he's back in the States, and he's focusing on bringing in the fans to check out the upcoming shows in Amarillo, Texas on January 3rd. This is a direct quote here. He said it's going to be a hoedown and a hootenanny. Is that not the most southern slang you've ever heard on NWA TV? He also name-dropped Tully, so I guess that'll be a program he's going to be working over the next few shows. Then Brad Armstrong wrestled Mike Jackson. Another very good little underneath TV match. The exact kind of high-energy, fast-paced action that would have fit right in with today's product. Only these guys' stuff actually made sense and resembled something pertaining to wrestling. Take note, Bucks. Did some nice chain wrestling, some nice back-and-forth trading on the mat. Brad worked over Jackson's arm and some holds for a little bit. Some really nice pin reversals and flash falls finishes at the end. And finally, Armstrong caught Jackson coming out of the corner with the Russian leg sweep takeover for the pin. Really good stuff. I believe this was the match, and I didn't write it down at the time, but I remember at some point on the show, one of the women in the audience audibly said the following: "Did you just call Scrappy sir?" And you could hear a couple other women giggling in the background too. To which I then thought, well, poor Scrappy McGowan's legacy has been forever tarnished. These studio fans, God, were they brutally honest back in the day. They did not shy away from admonishing heels or baby faces, up to and including the poor officials. Now, I, for one, didn't think Scrappy McGowan had much of a feminine look to him. At some point, I figured the receding hairline would have signified that it was time to just shave it all off, but apparently he was going for the Hulk Hogan look. It didn't work. It didn't even really work for Hogan. We had JJ and Tully out at the booth for a promo. Tully took a minute to run down his match with Dick Murdoch for the TV title in Minneapolis. Also mentioned something about Dusty, which is par for the course with the Tully Blanchard feud. He's always got to take his shots at the American Dream when he gets the chance. And then JJ took a minute to put over Brad Armstrong, so that he's made a lot of heads turn in the NWA lately. But when he's in the big cities over the next few weeks, he needs to be taking note of the Four Horsemen, because they've got a lot in store for 1987, including their, quote, big surprise in the works. They're not going to spill the beans just yet, but they are informing us that they've got something big in store. More foreshadowing. And then coming back, we had Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin, Precious, and Bill Dundee out for a promo. Bill Dundee did confirm here that he has now acquired the services of the Barbarian, and in doing so, he has sent him over to Asia to beat up a bunch of people, because apparently all the people eat in Asia is fish, and since Barbarian does not like fish, that means he will come back to the States leaner and meaner than ever. Boy, is that wacky pro wrestling logic at its finest. And in perfect superstar Bill Dundee slimeball delivery, he says that he is now issuing his first challenge on behalf of himself and the Barbarian. Since Nikita Koloff is ducking and dodging Dundee and refusing to wrestle him because he's not 6 feet and 250 pounds, Dundee is going to see it personally that the Barbarian gets his hands on Nikita. That way, Dundee and Barbarian can be the U.S. Heavyweight Champion together. That's some great old school Memphis logic right there. We got a set of U.S. Heavyweight Tag titles at the moment. And since Bill Dundee wants to be U.S. Heavyweight Champion so bad, let's have Dundee challenge Nikita Koloff on behalf of the Barbarian so that the Barbarian does all the work and Dundee can claim that he is champion after the fact. That sounds about right. So, Gorgeous Jimmy threw in some verbiage here, too, about how 87 is going to be another banner year for him, much like 86 was. And that brought us to our closing match, Gorgeous Jimmy versus Alan Martin, wherein Garvin won in about a minute with a brainbuster. The match went about as long as it took Garvin to strip out of his entrance attire. And we officially closed things out with Brad Armstrong doing a quick little babyface promo, putting over his desires to be world champion, talking about how he has to run through the best competition in the NWA to earn that number one contender spot, and that includes beating up guys like Jimmy Garvin. So naturally, as Armstrong's trying to go on, Gorgeous Jimmy and Precious come back out to interrupt and basically do the standoff with Brad, and they're about to come to blows, but that's when Tony gives the cutaway sign to end the show right then and there. But it appears that we'll be getting the continuation of our Armstrong versus Dundee Garvin feud that they kind of put on the back burner for a little bit. And now especially hearing the news that Bullet Bob will be back in the fold soon, that'll be a good sign. But, yeah. Holy cow. We went through the entire year of 1986 in NWA World Championship Wrestling. They said it couldn't be done. Actually, no one said that. Subconsciously, I was probably telling that to myself. But we have successfully run down the entire library of NWA's Saturday Night Superstation programming in 86. A journey that we actually started back in late 85 when we were first starting back up the review series. And now we have 2 years under our belt, even though it's more like a year and a half. Cool beans. And now we're ready to close the chapter on, I guess technically this would have been the second season, which is how a lot of this crap is labeled on Peacock. It's still the stupidest thing I've ever seen. Labeling pay-per-views and pro wrestling television by season. That's what you get when you have non-wrestling fans in charge of overseeing a tape library. But we will see how things pick up in the new year as we get ready to begin our 1987 journey for the NWA. And as I play with my hair and get this fucking shit out of my face, we'll similarly do the same for World Class Championship Wrestling, as we're about to review our last episode of Dallas TV for the year 1983. And this has been particularly fun for me because when I first started to review the World Class shows, and I think I said this at the time we began the series, a lot of this stuff I had really been seeing for the first time ever. You know, I'd obviously seen a lot of clips and matches from over the years, but as far as going through every show and sort of breaking things down as they happen in succession, this is really the first time I've gotten the opportunity to do that. So this will be a fun journey as we work our way through the archives and continue along through the next year. And for this special episode, we are viewing the official tape of the Christmas Star Wars event from Reunion Arena, not the Dallas Sportatorium. And, this is obviously part 1. Originally taped on Christmas Day, December 25th. Something I think a lot of us newer generation fans forget was actually a thing that occurred back in the day. Running wrestling events on Christmas Day. That was historically a thing that was done. And back when the product was geared and marketed to a more fan-friendly environment, it was not totally out of the ordinary for territories to run events in local towns on Christmas. And people would show up in droves. I think certain promoters would try and give families like discounted prices to try and get more people in the door for the events, but the ticket prices were usually cheaper from what I remember hearing. I remember Jim Cornette talked about that on his podcast at one point. Probably even as recent as one he did this past year. It's definitely something I encourage people to go check out and listen to, because he kind of breaks down the numbers and how that was all done. So we'll quickly, we will quickly run down some of the prelim material because, there were a few hairballs on this card that I really don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about. The opener was an underneath match, pinning the Missing Link up against Johnny Mantell. And I think I gave a pretty concise little rundown of the Missing Link on last week's Dallas TV review. The short and sweet of it is, not a fan. And I only really knew him from watching him work in Mid-South around the same period. From what I recall, he didn't really gain a lot of traction over there either. So I think this was a little after the Missing Link had already been in Bill Watts' territory. And then they sent him down to Dallas to try to get over the same gimmick there. Still didn't work. Although hearing Bill Mercer refer to him as a strange apparition, still very amusing. The match wasn't horrible or anything, but, Link was just a character that really didn't resonate with me at any point. The ring style was a little wonky for me. I really didn't get the whole unhinged borderline special needs gimmick they saddled him with. It was just, I don't know, a little too hokey for my money. Not the kind of wrestling I like. But he went over after doing a diving headbutt from the top rope and essentially ramming his head into Mantell's lower back. They actually did the same finish here as they did in that Bill Dundee match on the Superstation show we just reviewed. But really nothing else to say about it beyond that. Following the break was a quick little series of pre-taped interviews to hype the American Tag title match for later on. We started on the babyface side with the Iceman and Brian Adias. And the Iceman is still sporting the kayfabe damaged eye after he got burnt with Skandar Akbar's fireball several weeks back. So now he's just got the scarring around the eye. And he basically vowed that they're going to get down and funky later on. Made sure to throw in his patented "Have Mercy" line. And then Diaz, probably in the most monotone, boring manner as possible, said something to the extent of, "Tonight, it's all about the American tag titles. Iceman and I want the titles, and I don't think we can be stopped." And looking back, I may have put more effort into that delivery than Diaz did. I wrote down, boy, if there was ever a cure for insomnia, Brian Diaz's promo work. That'll fix the issue right there. And then we jumped over to the heels end with Akbar and the Super Ds. And Akbar put over that he's sick and tired of dealing with these baby faces, and his men are going to put a cap to everything tonight. He also promised that they were both going to get superplexed and carried out on a stretcher, to which I wrote down, remember when the superplex was sold as a devastating finisher at one point? And then everybody started doing it, up to and including the girls. Now we look at the superplex and we're like, oh, hey, look at that. Another cool move somebody did. God, wrestling sucks now. But we came back from break for the match. Iceman and Diaz versus the Super Ds for the American tag titles. And of course, factoring in everything that's gone down between the General and the Iceman in the last couple months, basically the entire match was built around those two. Everybody else was just kind of added color. I honestly forgot how Brian Diaz even got involved in this. I think he was part of a babyface run-in at one point where he made the save for the Iceman with like several other guys. So apparently it was just a matter of right place, right timing. And then Parsons said, yeah, this guy will work as a tag partner. Also, I should mention this. Apparently we are still operating under the notion that the Super Ds are both interchangeable and we're not supposed to know which Irwin brother is which. Up to and including both brothers referring to each other as 1 and 2 during the match. That was the thing that happened. And basically what we had here was about 10 to 12 minutes of relatively standard pro wrestling and approximately 3 minutes where the interesting stuff happened. There was a period very early on where the Iceman got to run wild on the heels and get a brief flurry of offense. But aside from that, the heels mainly worked over Diaz for the remainder of the match until the Iceman got the big hot tag at the end. And right when he was making his comeback, the heels went to try and cut the Iceman off. They do a spot where one of the heels whips the Iceman off the ropes, and he wound up coming back and cradling one of the Super Ds in a small package for the 3 count. A very shocking out-of-nowhere type finish, and the crowd definitely popped for it. And immediately after the bell, the heels all jumped the baby faces to try and get their heat back. They dumped Diaz out to the floor, basically sending him ass over tea kettle by dropping him across the top rope. All the while, they ended up beating down the Iceman in the ring, where one of them gave him the second rope superplex, and the Iceman sort of like he was dead. Not even a top rope superplex, but a second rope superplex. So, yeah, kind of killed 2 birds with 1 stone there. Title change for the babyfaces to give the Dallas fans a nice little send-off, but the heels still managed to get some of their heat back in the end. So it worked in both favors. Generally, the tag match was nothing to write home about, but it accomplished what it needed to. And again, I talk about this all the time when we do these classic reviews. Not every match needs to be a barn burner 5-star match of the year. In a lot of ways, sometimes keeping things simple is better. As long as you're getting to the right finish, everything else that happens in between is just filler. It's easy to forget that in wrestling a lot of the time. Now that the business has become all about guys trying to earn the best star ratings and win Match of the Year awards. Because again, wrestling is stupid now. But that took us to a Kerry Von Erich Skandar Akbar split pre-tape ahead of the main event. And kind of going over the story briefly, Akbar had voluntarily put up a $10,000 grant to anybody that could body slam the Ugandan warrior Kamala, figuring no one would be able to because, well, that's what cocky, smug prick heels do. So naturally, Kerry Von Erich rose up to the challenge and body slammed Kamala on television in front of everybody. The problem, though, is that the General isn't going to own up to that award because the match was not sanctioned. So fast forward to the event, and now the match has been made official. And, Kerry's just here to let Akbar know that he hustled him out of 10 grand before, but after tonight, he's going to owe him another 10 grand. One for the first successful body slam, and the other after he does the deed again tonight. And the General's response said that if Kerry thinks he's weaseling his way into another 10 grand, he's got another thing coming. Said the only thing he's cruising for is a $10,000 beating. He also sent his little warning message to Mike Von Erich, saying he has not forgotten about him. And he may be the only one, because I sure as hell forgot about Mike Von Erich. Very quickly, in fact. Anyhow, we had the match. Kerry and Kamala. And I believe I heard Mark Lorenz time this match out at 5 minutes and 12 seconds. Multiply that by about 10. That's how long it felt watching it. It was, Well, remember when I noted that the Iceman and Diaz versus Super D's tag match was simple but effective? Not the most exciting match in the world, but it wasn't harmful to your eyes. This match just flat out sucked. Really no way to sugarcoat that. At the very end, after what seemed like 18 hours of Kamala either stalling or grabbing Kerry's pecs to put him in nerve holds, the finish was Akbar reaching in and tripping up Kerry for the blatant DQ. But right before the heels could escape, Kerry also managed to body slam Kamala a second time. After the bell rang, obviously. So I guess the idea and story will be that technically, because Kerry was able to execute the body slam again, he should get the 10 grand. But I guess now Akbar will try to argue that the match was over by the time Kerry got the giant up. So that'll be twice that Kerry gets fucked over out of his hard-earned cash. So, kind of a predictable finish, but you can at least see where they were going in story. But the match was hideously dull. All said, that rounded out the first week of the Christmas Star Wars showdown. Next week's big featured match is the rematch between Jimmy Garvin and Chris Adams for the American Heavyweight Championship. Again, with the added stip that if Adams wins, Sunshine gets 5 minutes in the ring alone with Precious. Which, let's be honest, is the primary selling point of that entire match. I think the guys are unfortunately the appetizer in that scenario. As for this particular episode, not a very good season finale for World Class to close out 83. Again, not a horrendous show or anything, but looking back at the 3 matches we got here, the opening prelim match was a match featuring a wacky character that I never really dug all that much. The tag title match didn't really pick up until the last couple of minutes, and probably went about 5 minutes too long overall. And the main event with Kamala and Kerry was horrible, with a lame fucked finish at the end. Again, probably done to advance the story forward, and that's fine. But the stuff leading up to it didn't make the payoff any less blasé. But we'll see how things shift as we transition into 1984 for World Class. Again, some very key notable events coming up on the horizon. The big one happening in less than 2 months. Because we are coming up on the anniversary of David's unexpected passing in February. A discussion that kind of branches off into several different talking points, but we'll definitely analyze everything a bit further once we start approaching that time frame. But, as we round out the podcast, if the World Class reviews were something that caught your eye and you enjoyed listening to the discussions, chime in and let me know down below. Sometimes I know this might come across like the World Class reviews aren't always the most exciting thing in the world, and I think a lot of that is just reflective of the booking. I think Ken Mantell was still in charge of booking at this point, and Historically, his booking wasn't known for being the most exciting or thrilling. It was very formulaic, very basic, and it kind of showed in the product. It almost kind of followed the format of a lot of those NXT shows I used to watch back in the day, just for modern comparisons. You normally weren't going to have your intelligence insulted, but you also weren't going to get the most exhilarating product to watch from week to week. More often than not, the shows were going to be kind of basic, easy to digest, and while there's good to be had in that formula of booking, again, if you're somebody that kind of grew up with the Crash TV style of WWF television, or somebody that really enjoys the crazy angles and huge impactful moments, World Class, they dish out a couple of those occasionally, but generally it probably wasn't going to be the show for you. You would have probably been much better suited watching Mid-South television, which I also enjoyed a great deal as well. So, you pick and choose your battles at the end of the day. I, for one, don't mind the Ken Mantell style of booking, although I do recognize the common complaint from a lot of people that generally is just a very bland program. Luckily, World Class had the star power to carry everything forward, and that's kind of where the balance comes into play. So, I guess that'll about wrap everything up then. We are done with 2022, and the FSWR podcast succeeded and lived to fight another day. And now we'll just keep seeing if we gain more traction next year. I do want to take this opportunity to thank everybody that has subscribed to the YouTube channel or catches us on Rumble. Either way you support the show works great. If you're somebody that values the under-the-radar wrestling channels, this will probably be the one for you going forward. I've enjoyed getting the opportunity to just come on here and talk about pro wrestling with everybody. Classic content, modern content, good, bad, or otherwise. I just do this for hobby. I'm not trying to make any money off of it. I'm not trying to enter a career in the wrestling business or anything like that. This is just a fun side piece for me to do. A side hustle, if you will. And looking forward to next year when we dive into similar content. Hopefully things turn out perkier than a lot of 2022 did, by and large. Again, we talked about this on the Monday podcast, and there were a few bright spots, and a lot of those were short-lived, especially in the case of AEW. I think the biggest detriment to happen in wrestling this year was the injury plague from that early to late summer period where everybody was getting hurt. Again, I think it's reflective of the ongoing problems with the way everybody works in the business today, so hopefully that's a thing that gets addressed in 2023. Maybe someone will finally step up to teach the boys and girls how to work smarter instead of working harder. But again, with the AEW mentality of the young guys thinking they don't need to take advice from the veterans, not giving my hopes up for that either. Anyway, I appreciate y'all checking out the show. Take care, and we'll see you in the new year. Peace out.